Hey, what's going on, guys? We're back with part 8, and today I want to cover the next part of our platformer game is enemies. And I um, don't expect this video to completely finish enemies. I'm just gonna explain some concepts going into enemies before we do before we finish the entire thing. So I just made a new folder inside of scripts called the enemies, and made a new class called enemy spawner. And we're just gonna import the Unity engine DLL and the system.collections DLL. And then start it up just like always. So first thing you want to do is make a new property. We'll call it public game object of enemies. Now you'll notice something different about this is that we added these brackets here under, after game object, and what that means is enemies is a variable of type game object, but it's an array, which means it's a single variable for storing multiple instances of the same type. So within this enemy variable, we can have more than one game object. So I'm not going to go ahead and explain everything there is to know about arrays, but here's what you need to know. An array stores multiple instances of information, and we can serialize this by dragging on enemies inside the inspector in Unity. And the way to reference these is by using indexes. So for instance, if I want to get the first enemy in this list here, I could say the first enemy is enemies sub 0. That is taking out the first value from inside game object. And the reason for that is the number inside these brackets here is the index of the list in here. What an index is, it's basically like if you have a list of 5 items, the index is what number it is on that list. However, in the computer software, an index starts at 0 instead of 1. So always, that's an important thing to keep in mind. So always start at 0, and then for instance the length, you have to use the -1 for the end of it. So if I put 5 enemies inside this array, the 5th enemy is index 4 instead of index 5. Okay, that's as basic as I can get so far. Next thing, because this is an enemy spawner, let's have a public float for I don't know, max spawn delay. Another one for min spawn delay. Next, we'll make our start function. And the reason I'm making a start function instead of an update function is because, although yes, the update function is called every frame, however, there's no really way of keeping time. Well, you can keep time, but you can't wait for a certain amount of time with inside an update function. So we're going to use start, and we're going to use something called an enumerator, which is derived from our system.collections. So we're going to go ahead and start coroutine, which is basically it's making a new thread, basically. So something that can run on its own. It doesn't have to be updated by the main loop. And we're going to call this guy spawn manager. And then down here we'll make enumerator spawn manager. Now this is a method. As you can see, instead of void we have an enumerator, so this is the return type, I guess you could call it. And inside here, let's make we want this to run every single frame on its own. So the way we can make a loop is, there's several different types of loops, but the one we're worried about is called a while loop. And here's how it works: while, parentheses, and then brackets. So it looks familiar to an if statement, and that's how I like to think about it. Think of this as an if statement, that while the condition inside here is true, it'll keep running this loop. So as you can see, if we put true in here, it'll constantly run no matter what. Which in some things it's bad, but for this it's fine. Next, we'll make it wait a certain amount of time, so we'll do float wait time. Once again, we're making a new variable at runtime, calling it wait time. And this is a Unity built-in thing. We'll do random.range and then the min spawn delay, and the max spawn delay. So now this will return a random value in between our min and our max delay, and assign it to wait time. Next, we actually want to wait that amount of time, so we're going to do yield, return new, wait for seconds, wait time. Basically, yield means wait. Return is because, okay, basically what you need to know from this is just, this waits a certain amount of wait time. We can explain a bunch of these keywords later on, but I don't want to dive too deep into it at the moment. So this means wait for the return of a wait for seconds, which will wait this amount of time. So just wait this amount of time. Next, once the waiting is over, we're going to get a random index. So an index is an integer, by the way, so 0, 1, 2, remember I was talking about that? So int index equals another random.range. And this time we'll go from 0 to enemies.length. Now, if you remember, I was telling you guys that if I have 5 enemies inside the list, the 5th enemy's index will be 4. So you'd think, well, what happens if this returns 5? Because the length of the enemies is still 5. Well, that's because in this method here, the maximum is exclusive. So you can return a 0 from this, but you cannot return your max value. You can only return 1 minus your max value. So the most this can return is a 4 if we had 5 enemies in there. So we get a random integer. Then let's spawn them in, and we already know how to spawn. So instantiate enemies sub index transform dot position. I'll go into this in a little bit, and then quaternion dot identity. Alrighty. So you can see instead of plugging just a number, we can plug in a number that's been stored inside of a variable. So let's say, remember I was accessing enemies sub 0 with a 0? Basically that's the same thing. If this random.range returns a 0 and stores inside index, that 0 is what's plugged into this index here. And it gets out that enemy from the list and chooses that one to spawn in at this transforms position. So whatever game object we attach this to, this is inherited from mono behavior. Whatever game object this script is attached to, transform is just this game object, and then its own position, and then obviously the default rotation. Okay, so let's go ahead and save this and give it a go. If I have to load up Unity, let me pause this real quick. Alrighty, so let's go ahead and hit Control-Shift-N, and it'll just create a new empty game object. We'll call this spawner, and let's put him 0, 0, 0. Let's move him to the right a little bit, like there, and then we'll add in our, what was it? This is enemy spawner. We'll put its max spawn delay to 5 seconds and its minimum to, I don't know, 2 seconds. As you can see, this is our enemies array, and right now its size is 0. We'll just go ahead and make it 2. Let's make one of them a cube, and then let's go ahead and actually create a sphere. Why not? Make a new prefab from that. Delete him. Go back into our spawner, and our second enemy will be a sphere. Alright, let's save and run. And so it should spawn around in this area here, if we have any luck. Oh, there we go, and now we have a cube spawned in. Another cube. This time we got a sphere. It's hard to tell because they're inside each other, but there we go. So if and that's how it works. Obviously these are just static objects, and eventually we can code our own AI, and that might be in one of the future tutorials. So see you guys next time.